Excellent.
Splendid. Well, it's just one slide, and I will try my level best to remain within the allocated 11 minutes to us. Um, if you want to understand South
Perfect.
Asia's legal imagination, do not start with the constitution, contrary to what we've been hearing quite eloquently, I may add. You should, at least for the purposes of this paper, start with the river. The Indus is our longest running joint venture. It has outlived empires, partitions, wars, and even some of the economists who designed it. And yet, in 2025, this venerable treaty reads rather like a post colonial engineering manual, brilliant at moving water, remarkably uninterested in moving justice. This paper that I have penned for this symposium and also for the journal tries to do something slightly impotent. Uh, it is looking at this holy text of hydrodiplomacy, and it asks what happens if we treat the Indus Water Treaty not as the last word on allocation, but as the first draft on rights based green transitions. Because today the story is no longer simply India upstream, Pakistan downstream, World Bank in between. The story is of melting glaciers, erratic monsoons, floods that redraw maps overnight, decarbonisation plans that see every river as a gigawatt waiting to be harnessed. In other words, the Indus is now expected to irrigate fields, light cities, absorb climate shocks, and somehow still respect human dignity along the way. The treaty, unfortunately, was not written for that world. It does three things alone, and it does them well. It divides the basin into eastern rivers for India, western rivers largely for Pakistan, and sets up a permanent Indus Commission to swap data and niceties. And it gives us a ladder of dispute settlement, from questions to neutral experts to a permanent court of arbitration in The Hague. What it does not do, in a single word, is care or think about the people. No mention of human rights or rights to water, no reference to the right to development, nothing on resettlement, nothing on compensation, nothing on what happens to the fisher who finds the flow which sustained his catch become a trickle, or to a woman whose village is shifted because a perfectly lawful dam has inundated her home. That silence might have been forgivable in 1960. It is less forgivable when we have lived through Mangla's displacement, when the whole communities of Mirpur ended up rebuilding their lives in the West Midlands of the United Kingdom, when we have reached and watched Kishanganga redraw the landscape of the Gurus, when we can measure in real time how a sudden landscape and a flushing of a reservoir of upstream translates into a ruined crop downstream. The law on our side and the ledger has moved. Both India and Pakistan have constitutional and policy commitments to socio-economic rights, the right to water, the right to health, to a decent work space, to information, to participation. These are no longer the exotic concerns of Geneva commitments. They are, at the very least, on paper, part of the basic vocabulary of our states. Yet the Indus framework remains locked in its old ancient grammar. It is obsessed with cubic feet per second and megawatt, with design features and life storage, but has nothing to say about who gains and who loses when the flow shifts. So this paper makes three attempts. It borrows the idea of just transition from the climate and labor regimes of law, and at its very heart looks at just transition and what this means. If we are going to build a cleaner, greener economy, we cannot treat affected workers and communities as collateral damage. Coal miners must not simply be told, "Thank you for your service, please enjoy unemployment in a decarbonized economy." They must be offered alternative livelihoods, restraining social protections, and perhaps most of all, a voice. Transplant that idea into a river basin, and the question becomes as follows. When India and Pakistan seek more hydropower, more efficient irrigation, more solar plummeted agriculture in the name of climate action. Who pays the price and who shares the benefits? If a dam upstream provides cheap peaking power to a metropolitan middle class but displaces the mountain communities and alters flows to deltas, can we honestly call that just? Second, this paper also draws on the language of benefit sharing. International practice, as I shall discuss later, shows and tells us that this language of benefit sharing, is quarreling over how much water each state may take, and to ask how the benefit from the water, electricity, food control, navigation, regional trade can be enlarged and most of all shared. South Africa talks about benefit sharing wheel. The Senegal River is run on the idea of common works with shared gains. The Nile Basin River Initiative is based on experimentations with joint projects where states share costs and returns, not only drops of water. The Mekong, on the other side, is not also rosy. But even there, the agreement and the consultation procedure is at least creating a space whose proposed dams are notified, discussed, critiqued, and including communities and civil society. Laos may be going ahead, but it does not have uh, the capacity to let the Vietnamese and Thai and their concerns go unheard. This has already been a different universe from the Indus, where downstream communities often discover a project from the newspaper long after the design has been finalized and the contractor paid for his mobilization advancement. Third, this paper tries to retort these ideas into very specific plumbing of the Indus Treaty. I am not proposing to tear up the treaty, nor to reopen the allocation bargain. That way lies in diplomatic masochism. Instead, I suggest we treat the Indus Water Treaty as a chassis on which new rights-based components can be mounted. How, you may ask? Well, you look at the human rights impact assessment. We are used to this in an environmental sense with environmental impact assessment, in at least theory. However, the human rights impact assessment would be breaking ground. Who stands to be moved? Who stands to lose the land, or work, or culture, or livelihood? Whose water quality might worsen? And how will we avoid irreparable repair, where repatriation or reconciliation needs to be drawn, as we heard earlier? No community should learn of its entire existence through displacement when the bulldozer arrives. It should see it in black and white, what is proposed, what are the alternatives, what is considered, what compensation is proposed, what resettlement, if any, is offered. The second tool is community driven benefit sharing. The idea is disarmingly simple. When a dam makes money, so should the people who bear the cost. We have already had hints of this in the region. Some Indian states earmark a percentage of hydropower revenues as free power to the host region. The Khyber Pass and the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa has long fought over its hydropower profit surcharge at the federal level. The Gilgit Baltistan and the Chitral micro hydro schemes run a community group where often members come and engage in fruitful discussion. This paper also suggests that the scaling and the logic up of hardwiring it into our basin regime is important. Imagine if a treaty or a protocol under it required that a fixed share of the net revenues from any new in this hydropower project be paid to a local trust run by a committee where villagers, women's groups, local governments, and project operators sat together. They decide whether the money goes into a school, a health center, drinking water, vocational training, or even direct cash transfers to the most vulnerable. This is not radical socialism. It is basic fairness. It is a basic human right. If you flood my valley to light up your city, the very least you can do is owe me a dividend. The third tool is participatory oversight and grievous stress. At present, the Permanent Indus Commission speaks to governments, not to people. The only formal disputes settlement mechanism under the treaty are state to state. A farmer in Sindh whose crop has failed because of an unexpected surge has no standing under any aspect of the Indus Water Treaty. We can, as a collective, do better. The Commission, therefore, should have a mandate where it could investigate patterns, where it could look at particular sites, operations, practices. Transparency here is not a human rights luxury point of focus, it is risk management. When people feel heard and seen and course corrected, they are less likely to express their discontentment and blocking roads, breaking gates, or in our parts of the world, filing writ petitions on every second Tuesday. All of this may sound community friendly, but the paper is not about naive state interests. It proposes a practical roadmap that works with, not against, incentives of Delhi and Islamabad. No one is suggesting a grand constitutional conference for the Indus. What I sketch instead is incrementalization with a spine, a soft law protocol or a declaration, perhaps facilitated again by the World Bank or a regional body, in which both states endorse three principles: just transition, equitable benefit sharing, and participatory justice, and commit to apply them to the future of Indus projects. On the technical side, you can smuggle into this the familiar world of public private partnerships, UNCITRAL's model law provisions that talk assessingly about the social and environmental aspects, about consultations and transparency. ASEAN's energy plans have already spoken the language of cross border power grids. There is no reason why a carefully drafted benefit sharing annex to the Indus Water Treaty would borrow these clauses, translate them into basin contexts, and allow arbitrators and neutral experts to treat them as relevant rules of international law when interpreting the treaty. In other words, you do not overthrow the Indus architecture, you nudge its interpretation and practice so that tomorrow's treaties lawyers reading the same articles feel obliged to ask, and what about the people? Let me be clear about what the paper does not claim. It does not claim a promise that benefit sharing will magically erase the politics of Kashmir or the grievances of the Committee of Lahore and will abolish provincial suspicion and infighting in other regions. It does not assert that the Mekong or the Nile offer a perfect model. They do not. What it does assert is that we have enough experience, enough jurisprudence, enough hard lessons to know what a purely volumetric, state centric approach is feasible. For Indian lawyers, such as myself, there is a deeper irony here. We have a constitutional tradition that has read into the right of life everything from clean air to shelter to pollution free Taj Mahal. We have courts that have converted railway platforms into public interest jurisdictions. Yet, when we step onto the terrain of a treaty that shapes the lives of millions, we become suddenly modest, content, and count to the megawatts. My modest plea is that we bring back those traditions into conversation, that we allow the vocabulary of rights and justice, which we deploy so readily within our borders, and inform how we read, supplement, and operate the Indus Water Treaty. The Indus, after all, is not simply a quantity of water that can be divided. It is a lived landscape, a legal relationship, and dare one say, a shared destiny. If the green transition in the next chapter of this story is to be portrayed, then we must ask ourselves as international lawyers, how much power can we extract? And how much fairness should we extract back into it? If we can answer that with even a fraction of ingenuity that our engineers brought to the canal design in the 19th century, or to the dispute settlement mechanism in the 20th century, and then perhaps in the 21st century, we might finally achieve what the treaty never set out to do, but can still make do and serve. Not just peace between states, but justice along the banks. Those words, I once again thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity to share my thoughts and perspective. I am open for questions and do hope that I was within time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ankit. This is brilliant presentation as well. Very much enjoyed it. But I give first the floor to the people present here